kind of have to look at it.
Clap when you're ready and then go.
Welcome to the 4th episode of our podcast. Today we're fortunate enough to have a local presenter and arguably a bit of a celebrity, Jim Byrne. Jim, would you mind talking to our viewers a bit about yourself, please, mate?
Hello, everybody. First and foremost, thank you very much for having me.
You're
Anthony,
welcome.
Really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here. So a bit about myself. So I'm 53 years of age. I know I don't look it. Don't. Yeah. So I own Radio Embrace Radio, and I used to be a part of Corby Radio for many years. I'm married. I've got 4 children. Married to the lovely Michelle, who's the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm not being paid to say that, Michelle. But seriously, she is. I've got wonderful kids that mean the world to me. They are my life. I've got a lot of things that I do, and sometimes you'll think, oh, how do you cram that into life? And you've got to be quite good at time management, not something that was good before that. So I've got interests in the radio, as you know. Football, I'm a big fan of Liverpool. I like reading. And of course, I love radio. So I got into running Embrace Radio with my best friend, Paul Moore, around about 2017. But we had the idea from 2015. And it's gone from strength to strength. There's a lot happening in that at the moment, and some things that I can't keep up with. But generally, that's me in a nutshell. I was born in Ireland, although my family came across when I was 2 years old in the early 70s. So I haven't got the Irish accent. Mm-hmm. My sister, who's 2 years older than me, Philomena, she was 4. She still got the Irish accent, would you believe? She still got strains of that. So, but yeah, so getting back to it, that's me. I dare say you'll ask a few more questions around that.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, I'm delighted to be here. So thank you, Anthony, for having me.
Well, thank you for coming. So I hear that Ireland's capital is the largest city in the world.
Dublin.
Yeah, because it keeps doubling and doubling and doubling. Hey, start it off with a bad joke.
Don't start me, because I can get going, I can assure you. Excuse me.
Yeah, that's... sorry, I had to get that really bad joke in, but, you know, it's always a good icebreaker. So, radio, because there's a few things, actually, before we touch on radio, that you know, it's a great introduction, but you may have sort of glazed over. You're a big sci-fi fan, for example.
Massively.
Yeah.
Doctor Who, Star Wars, Star Trek. So, yes, I can turn into a nerd. I think nerds are more celebrated nowadays than they were back in our younger days.
Yeah, that's right.
Excuse me. But Doctor Who, I'm a massive fan of Doctor Who. If I was to pick out of Star Wars, Star Trek and Doctor Who, I'd always go with Doctor Who. Something about when I was a kid, the TARDIS, and still to this day, I still have that wonder of opening a door. It's like going into Narnia through the wardrobe. You walk through a door and it creates this big open space. It's just, I don't know, I couldn't articulate why.
Yeah.
But the show with a regeneration from one individual to a new being, it just fascinates me. So I love Doctor Who.
All right, so a bit of impossible fan thing, because they're 2 different universes then. So do you think the Doctor could deal with Darth Vader if he had to do it and there was no Luke?
Well, he would use, or she, or it, or whatever, whatever nowadays, would use their intelligence more than their brawn or whatever.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't whip out a lightsaber, they'd whip out their sonic screwdriver to disarm in the best way possible. So I think that's where Doctor Who is kind of, for everybody, the Doctor would use their intelligence and kind of negotiation skills to disarm, and that's always impressed me as well.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's the difference.
Probably helps that the Doctor can regenerate as well. So if he does get stabbed, you know, there's a bit of regeneration going on there. So.
Or if the show's losing ratings, it's always a good thing to do.
yeah, it's a controversial subject, modern Doctor Who right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, and arguably most importantly, a man of faith. So.
Absolutely, and I think that's it is, apart from my family being the most important people in my life and my friends, Jesus Christ is the biggest thing in my life. And over the years, when you're younger, you tend to, well, certainly for me, you kind of become apologetic for that. But certainly when I got into my older years, I'm not apologetic for that. You know, and back in the day when you see somebody on a street corner, you know, expressing the virtues of Christianity, you'd think, you know, a lot of people think, you know, that they belong in the loony bin or whatever. But no. And I think and we might touch on that before the end of this show, is that I think that the world, and certainly this country, has suffered because of the dilution of Christian values.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You know, there's been a thousand years of Christian values built this country into the monolith that it once was, and you could almost say on a sliding scale, for you younger kids, that's something used for measuring, that you can measure the decline of the church, as it were, and the increase in failing of this nation in many aspects.
Absolutely, and I'll use an atheist that professed this in some way, Terry Pratchett, the author. So when I was studying creative writing many years ago, I saw an interview with him, or read an interview in a newspaper, forget what it was, and he said, you don't have to be a Christian to live Christian values. And he said that if he had his time again, he would send his children to Christian schools because of the simple value, love one another, or treat one another the same way you want to be treated. And it's all about love. If it's all kind of brought down to its common denominator, everything in life that has suffered is because of a lack of love, or for me and for you, I would expect for sure, is a lack of Jesus Christ.
Absolutely.
And I know there are a lot of people that have different beliefs and follow different religions, and I shouldn't, and you shouldn't, or anybody should be, for what they believe in, should be ridiculed by anybody else or told that that's not right. And I think that nowadays we've had to be very mindful about our beliefs when we shouldn't be persecuted for our beliefs. And there's a lot of people in countries around the world, Christians, that perhaps more than ever in the history of Christianity are being persecuted and killed, and there's not enough, there's not enough people that talk about that, or media outlets that talk about it, but it's a serious problem nowadays.
Well, the Bible does tell us that Christians will be persecuted for following Jesus Christ, so it's not a surprise to me that we're seeing this, and that's ultimately the scripture being fulfilled, isn't it? That's what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
So obviously your faith drives a lot of stuff, and all of the stuff in your life is around faith. So let's move on to the history of Jim. So you spoke that you before Embrace you were at Corby Radio. So how did the spark of radio enter your life? What was is there a defining moment where you said, okay, this is for me, or I love this and I need to get into it? Do you remember that moment?
Yeah, I'd have to thank my mum, Phyllis, for that, because when we were kids growing up, every morning Terry Wogan would be on the radio, and you look at Terry, what a talent.
Yeah.
And if you were going to draw up the kind of blueprint for a radio presenter, Terry Wogan wouldn't be that person. But he absolutely nailed it in every shape and form that he possibly could. And I really got the spark from Terry Wogan. And I was always, I love to read books. I love to read out loud.
Yeah.
And I remember we had the tape recorder at home, and in the room we'd have the press play and record. And I used to always love reading out sports reports, this, that, and the other. And I think it was just a natural progression for when the opportunity came. It was with a local station. I don't know if you probably won't remember it. James might remember it. Who's doing this podcast? Is KCBC, which was the Kettering and Corby Broadcasting Company. I was lucky enough to be welcomed into that kind of team, and I did some sports reports over the years. Back in 1995, and I got the bug. I loved it, and fortunately, a couple of years later. And I'll always be grateful. Des Barber was running Corby Radio. He created Corby Radio and gave me that opportunity to do my first show, which was a sports show. And that was back in 1998. And from then onwards, I just progressed to doing quite a few shows that over time, and I loved it. And the bug has always stayed with me.
I know that's really interesting. So I don't know about KCBC, and it's interesting that you mentioned Terry Wogan. I have a very different memory of obviously great, fantastic, presenter. But one of the the hardest listens in my life was Terry Wogan, and he was interviewing Kate Bush. So, but context is important. That's not on Terry Wogan. So I was in Kosovo at the time, and it was the middle of the night, stuck in a semi-destroyed shipping container, and the only station that we could get on a broken, let's say it's like a plasterer's radio, right? It's just semi-broken radio that we found was BBC World Service, and the interview with Kate Bush must have gone on for, I don't know, it felt like 4 hours. Maybe it wasn't that long, right? But it was a rough listen, especially when you're freezing. And I remember thinking, could you not get someone else? Kate Bush, obviously very beautiful back when she was younger, exceptionally talented singer. But I think it's fair to say she's mad as a box of frogs. You know, she really, she was talking about the sharpness of the concrete and corners and when she looked around. But of course, she's an artistic type, so her perception of the world is different to mine. But it was a very difficult listen.
I suppose that it's surprising to hear that with Terry Wogan. I'd have probably thought more so with his TV interviewing, and as opposed to radio, because radio was his platform. We did very well on the TV. Let's agree on that. But I've never heard an interview with Kate Bush, so you're one-upping me on that. But I mean, what a talent she is. Obviously, she's kind of gone back. She's not doing anything so much these days. But getting back to Terry Wogan, he had this ability where he would start talking, and sometimes I would feel myself when I'm presenting. Although I want to be myself, I can feel Terry Wogan coming out. My mum has told me that, and I don't aim to be that. I want to be myself at all times, but you can't help but fail to kind of think of people when you're doing something. And Terry Wogan is definitely one of them. Perhaps Steve Wright, Chris Evans, you take facets of them, but you've always got to be yourself. And I would say to anybody that wants to get into radio or anything, is be yourself for sure. Definitely.
Well, I think it's interesting because when I first heard you on the radio, I almost didn't recognise you, because most people will know about a telephone voice, but I've never come across a radio voice. And you know, not that you aren't, but you sound like a radio presenter when you're talking, which is very different to how you are here. And of course, you also do audiobooks, which again is a different sound. You know, you do very well at projecting the story in a different voice almost. You know, it's like you've got a catalogue of professional voices. So where did you learn to develop that?
I think going back to the radio voice, and you're not the only one that said that, and I always want to be myself. I don't want to be anybody else. But when I'm behind a mic doing a radio show, I'm at my happiest.
Yeah.
And that comes across, I think. And it was before, when you first start doing radio, you're nervous, you have never done it before. But when you get used to it, you start to get happier. Your voice, I think, is the right word. You accentuate it. You're happy, and you want to portray that to other people. And if you're doing a show, you want to make it the best it possibly can be. And I think that, you know, to relate back to the interview with Terry Wogan and Kate Bush, you kind of switched off because it was just, it might have been monotone, but the subject matter was boring. They're talking about concrete. You're sitting in a cold shack in Kosovo, wherever you were, and you're thinking, I want to hear more than this. And I guess it's the same way for, you mentioned narrating books. When you're narrating a book, you have to bring it alive for the listener. You've got to be enthusiastic, for one, because if I'm listening to a monotone voice, I'll switch off and I'll go somewhere else. And I want to make sure that doesn't happen. And when you're doing that, if you've got another character, you want to bring that character to life. So you give that character an accent. You obviously agree with the author first. What type of accent do you want for this character? And there was a fantasy book series that I did back in 2017, Archer of the Heathland, and they spawned a few others. And I remember having a chat with the author, and I said, I think that this character could have a Northern Ireland accent. And it was not Liam Neeson, but that's the one I would kind of focus on and turn it into something like that. And they said, well, give us a blast of it. So I did, and that's how that came. But it became very interesting. And I think the audiobook, the proudest thing I am of my audio narration is when I got approached by, out of the blue, through somebody that I did the books with, I got approached by J.R. Tolkien's grandson,
Wow.
Michael, and him and his both he and his wife liked a sample that they'd heard, and they listened to a bit more, and they wanted me to do a bit of work for them, and it was a book that they'd collaborated on together, an audio book called Refuge with the great grandson of Charles Dickens.
Wow.
And I was thinking, and I'm dining out on this one, so anybody that asks me, so I'm just kind of, and that was my biggest kind of, from the narration world, my biggest kind of nod from somebody, and I was very pleased with it, that I did the opening, the epilogue, and there was some other references in there for Gerald Dickens and Michael Tolkien, who did the audiobook together. And when everybody asks me, what's your proudest moment in narration, that's it. So, yeah.
So I guess it would be fair to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're almost, because of your joy of radio and audiobooks, you're immersing yourself in the material. So that's where, so it's not like you're pretending to be a different voice. What you're doing is projecting from that immersion of what you think. So it's the true you, but you're invested because you're immersed in the material.
Definitely. Absolutely. And if you're going to do anything, particularly if you're going to do a book, and the author has given you a book or short piece or whatever that might be, it's up to you to bring that alive to the best possible way you can. And certainly that's what I've always aimed to do. But the thing about this is also that once you do something like this, you elevate yourself, or you put your head above the parapet, so to speak. And whenever you're going to get into this, you have to have a bit of, you need to have a tough skin, a thick skin. I always say I'm halfway there, I'm thick. But in terms of, is that Audible?
It's not true.
Well, Audible, you're going to put yourself out there, and it's going to be reviewed by people. And I can guarantee you're always going to remember the negative reviews more so than the nice reviews. And I'll always remember a book that I did. It was a historical fiction one called The Forgotten Princess. And I spent the best part of a year doing that. It was about between 12 and 15 hours end material. So I edited it myself. So you can imagine clicking, and James doing the podcast will know better than anybody of having to edit audio files. And the amount of work that goes into creating an audio book for somebody that doesn't have a producer or his beck and call that can do it for them, it's immense. And one audio or Audible review, it smashed me. It was, somebody had put on, I wish you can give 5 stars. I wish there was a ability to give 0 stars. But
Wow.
I chewed on it for the best part of a couple of weeks, thinking, goodness me. But then I just thought to myself, think about it. Once you do something like that, you're going to put yourself up for criticism, both good, bad, or indifferent. And if you want to carry on, you need to get over it quickly. And I've seen in the audiobook world that people that I've seen on forums that they really struggle with it. And I always feel obliged to step in and say, look, think of it, just look at it objectively as opposed to the emotion of it. Through any walk of life, you're going to be criticised. Some of it will be a great opportunity to learn and take that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's going to be, hang on, I don't agree with that, and you've got every right not to agree with that. But whatever happens, don't let it destroy you. Keep moving is my advice to anybody.
But, from a reviews perspective, and I said this with the previous guest, the thing about the internet is it's a great place for cowards to hide and try and strike, right? And, these people who, if it's not necessarily constructive and it's always negative, I mean, me personally, it gives me a giggle when people do stuff like that. I said something mean on a video, and I think, well, it must be nice to have so few problems in the real world that you've got time to try and lambast somebody or drag them down. I think you're completely right about owning it, and just understanding it and building that resilience to it, and I dare say that, I know for a fact that we try and put a lot of stuff all positive on our social media out there, And we've had some wild comebacks, and to me, I think it's great,
Yeah, we'll have some wild comebacks from this. Who's that?
Yeah.
He's wearing a Dublin shirt, and who does he think he is? You've got to be, by even doing this, you open it up to all sorts of people.
Absolutely.
And their opinions are none of my business.
Yeah.
But also, just on top of that, but I understand people in the public eye who are probably more fragile from a personality perspective, that how it affects them. Because I had a touch of it before. Now, I always aim, you can't get on with everybody.
Yeah.
But I always put something good out. And sometimes, unfortunately, you'll have people that don't like you for whatever reason. And I always remember a really kind of tough period where something happened at work, too long to go into, that I did something from the right place, but somebody didn't agree with it. And they put it up on Facebook, outed me as this, that, and the other. And there was people that would come on the Facebook thread that said, I know Jim Byrne, I worked there before, I didn't like him, and he was this, he was that, and I'd look at him, who's that? I don't remember seeing that person. Yeah. But again, it's about trying to park that, and the person that put that up, I do get on with them now, but they were the vitriol was unbelievable. And I remember seeing them about a year or two later, and they walked into a pub and we just threw our arms around each other. But going back to what you said, is that modern day technology has, unfortunately in some cases, opened it up for people that can be quite nasty.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I do feel for people that perhaps aren't mentally equipped to deal with that. So I always feel, if I see a forum or somebody that's struggling, I always want to help them and to see if I can just give them the benefit of the experience I've been through before. Yeah. And I've only been, and it's only a little bit to what some people have had to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we rewind the clock and we go back to so you've done KCBC,
Mm-hmm.
you've then moved over to Corby Radio doing the sports segment.
Mm-hmm.
You've done audio books, and you've had some arguably fantastic success with some sort of how would I describe them? Some dynasties in the literature world, have come together for their thing, and you've been a part of that. So what was the next step after sort of the sports? What did you do in terms of radio, or did you stay doing the sports, or what was the next elevation for you?
So the next elevation was I was lucky enough for Des Barber to give me the Saturday morning breakfast show when Corby Radio went to FM, and I had a wonderful period on that. I mean, I brought my own kind of personality to the show. I had a lot of comedy, a lot of humour, and when you're going along, you learn what a listener likes. But you've always got to go, if you're right, it's like writing for a magazine, a different magazine. You've got to write to their house style, and with a radio station, it's much the same. You've got to have you've got to be yourself, but you've got to conform to their kind of what they want to do. And there'll be times where, I'll give you an example, where I always remember it, was I played a song one morning and I got criticised where I thought it was unjust at the time from Des, but I played Star Trekking, which is a really
Spitting Image.
It's a really well. It's kind of similar to Spitting Image, but it's still to this day. Every time I hear it, it's funny, but it's about playing at the right time.
Yeah.
If you play it at the right time, and Paul Moore, who's been tremendous for my career, actually I agreed with Des, and I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you've played it at the school run. Well, what do you mean? So, well, that's our selling, but it's a business.
Yeah.
People are going to switch off. What's this? What's he playing? Star Trekking. Click. Some people will say, brilliant, I love that. But the majority of people think that, what are you playing? So anyway, getting back to that, so that you learn as you go along. So I did the Saturday breakfast show for quite some time, and then I then had the privilege of presenting the breakfast show, which is massive for anybody's CV. If you do a breakfast show, it doesn't matter where you do it. It's a sign that you've arrived and you've done well. And then I did the drive time show as well. And then in terms of how Corby Radio went, you want to do your own thing. And I had no fallouts with Des, or anything like that. But I just wanted to do my own thing, and we eventually stepped down from Corby Radio, left, and that's where Embrace came from, and it's kind of gone from strength to strength. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's gradually, and we're still in the phase of our journey. But I've got another side to my business that we're looking at as well, which is DAB, and there's a lot that's going on with there at the minute.
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack there, and I think what we'll do is we'll start looking at Embrace, and then maybe talk about DAB, and then some other bits and pieces shortly. So let's explore Embrace. So you've started it, and then what happened after that?
So when you move on to just talk about the kind of like the politics that happen from that, if you don't mind.
No, of course.
So Des Barber running Corby Radio, and naturally, and I don't hold this against Des. Des had a fantastic brand in Corby Radio, and I think he was naturally concerned of the way I've objectively looked at it. And me and Des never had a fallout in any shape or form, but I think it's just his kind of obvious or subjective reaction was Paul and Jim have left. They've started Embrace, and saw us as perhaps a threat to Corby Radio, which we never were. We never intended to be, because my love for Corby Radio continues, and it always will. But from that perspective, we're just disappointed that our relationship suffered, even though we never had a falling out. But that's by the by anyway. But you'll find, and you find as you create things, that certain people, and I'm not saying Des is doing it, but certain people that you come across in the radio world or any walk of life don't like to see people get on.
Yeah.
And that can be very disappointing, particularly when all you want to do is put good out. But it happens. But Embrace was set up pretty much from my perspective, and Paul's, that is putting love out there. It's putting our love for radio, embracing everything we want to do, and providing a kind of an entertainment package for everybody, not just we have to, from a business perspective, have a niche, and our niche would be from the 80s up to the present day, and that radio is in itself, if you want to be successful in a business, you've got to notice what your niche product is. But Embrace was started that we would want to, and still do, want to create other stations.
Yeah.
So it would be Embrace's like Absolute's model. It would be Absolute Radio. Then you'd have Embrace 80s, Embrace Jazz, Embrace Rock, Embrace Nation Radio doing it. All radio stations are doing it now. And that was the concept from the beginning. Paul Moore is definitely a visionary, but I feel for that moment in time I was as well. It's something that I looked, but I prayed to God that I would have the opportunity to do that, and I continue to do that, and that's how Embrace came about, and it leads on to you talk about the DAB side of things, but I'm just very proud of how we've slowly, and I wouldn't say methodically, but slowly and gradually built up the brand, and it's out there, and people are enjoying it. Not everyone will enjoy it. That's like anything, but you've always got the chance to click off. But in our jobs, and if we want the business to survive, we want to reduce the risk of people clicking off.
And I suppose branching out like the Absolute model is a great way of doing that, because everybody has their favourite genre. I mean, I've got a love of a broad set of genres of music, but I still have my favourites, so if I'm feeling like a particular thing, then having the option to go to, say, Embrace Classical or Embrace Rock or whatever that they might be titled as, is a fantastic way of retaining the audience, because the brand Embrace itself is, sort of the pet. It's like McDonald's, isn't it? Everybody knows a Big Mac, right?
Yes.
But if you don't fancy that, you can have chicken nuggets.
Yeah.
So having those options and moving forward is a great way to sort of build that base, and I look forward to seeing that. I think maybe for the benefit of the audience, how did you settle on the name Embrace?
So, interesting, very good question. So, my wife who's been, I have to, not that I've been encouraged to do so, but if it hadn't been for Michelle, I wouldn't be able to do any of this, and genuinely mean that, because I do quite a lot, but my time management we spoke about earlier on, I've got better at that. But she's been an incredible rock behind me, support me all the way. And her favourite band is Embrace. And that's one of the aspects to it. But it's generally the embrace is just, it's a lovely word, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it can mean a lot of things. So I like to embrace, sounds cheesy this does, but it's true. I like to embrace the audience. I like to embrace the world. Let's all kind of embrace each other in one common goal of being happy and feeling good and sharing the love, sharing whatever that is. And I just think that would be the best way I could sum that up, to be honest, Anthony. And I'm very proud of that name. And I'm very proud the other week that a good friend, Pete T, who's been very influential in my radio career as well as others, and I didn't mention earlier on, which I really feel I have to. Pat McMahon was wonderful, gave his time for me when I was starting out in radio, and it's something that you never forget, that people give their time. And Pete T is along with Paul and Des, who have been really kind of influential. But Pete asked Paul the question, where did the name Embrace come from? And I was thinking, and I'd forgotten, it's not something I sit on and say, it was me. But Paul actually said, well, that was Jim. And Paul, who you get to know Paul, he's he doesn't share a lot in terms of, he's very guarded. He doesn't let a lot of people in. And when he gives you a compliment, you feel you're on top of the world. And he said, it was a brilliant thing. Jim did that. He created the word embrace. And I just got very proud of that. And you'll know yourself with BTC Citadel, Anthony, you're very proud of that brand.
Yeah.
And when I hear people talk about Embrace, or was listening to Embrace, they don't know who I am. And they talk, I was listening to Embrace. You're very proud of it. It's like having a son or a daughter.
It's another child.
And that's how I feel it, because it means a lot to me. I think when you start out in business and you want to do well in business, you've got to care about your brand.
Yeah.
And that's where we are. And so that's where in a kind of convoluted, should we say, manner of telling you how the name came, but it came from Michelle, really.
But you're creating something out of nothing, aren't you? So then you're turning almost the intangible, the dream, into the tangible, a physical thing. So, and I think, just sort of touching on the situation with wives, I think it's a fantastic thing to mention Michelle's role in this, because same as me and same as many other people out there that are trying to do things, bring a bit of good into the world, make something from nothing, if it wasn't for a good wife, it's not achievable. It's just not achievable. And I'm forever grateful to Leanne, as you are to Michelle, for providing not only the support, but providing that air gap, if you like, between home life and work life, so that you have the space to create.
Definitely, Anthony. And the thing with Michelle is that she recognises the dreams I have, and some people might look from afar and say, goodness me, Jim's probably a bit selfish with all the things he wants to do. But I can assure you now, if my wife questioned anything, then I wouldn't be here talking to you now.
Of course, yeah.
And she doesn't. She obviously wants to spend time with me, with the family. But the beauty of radio, give some tricks away. I like to do as many live shows as I possibly can. But sometimes, and to maintain that happy medium, is that I can pre-record. Yeah. Steve Wright did that brilliantly, but as long as you can maintain the same magic that it sounds live, then I'm a big supporter of that. I never used to be, but I am now. But when it gets down to your marriage and your family, which is everything, it always has to be, and society reflects that nowadays. Is that the traditions of a married life and a strong family unit have been eradicated over the years. We all have, the temptations in life are there for everybody, and is the grass green or the other side or whatever. But to maintain a healthy marriage, you have to work on it every day. Yeah, the love's there. Obviously, you got together for a reason. But I couldn't speak highly enough of Michelle and what she's done for me, and the support she's given. She's probably been frustrated in the background and say, I want to, because she just wants to be around me.
Yeah.
And when I'm on the phone sometimes, and it's brilliant what she does, is that she'll start talking, and as a male, I can't concentrate on two things, and I'm just trying to finish something off, And yeah. And she said, you didn't hear a word I said that? Yeah, I did. What did I just say then? So she gets me from that perspective. But I mean, the biggest tribute I can pay to Michelle is not the fact that she gives me all the love, is the fact that she gives me all the support. And I mean 1,000,000%, because I wouldn't be able to do the things I could do without her.
That's a wonderful testament to Michelle. You know, what's wonderful about that is I get caught out with the same trick.
Yeah.
I get asked, "Oh, you were listening, were you? So what did I say?"
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
just-
And fair play, because it's like your children. It's like you listen to understand. Listening is a skill. And there's another chap that I feel right to mention who shaped me as a person. I mean, my mum and dad were brilliant for me, but it was my uncle Ron McGoldrick, and I used to go down and speak to him quite a lot. We forged a great relationship, and sadly he's no longer with us. But he'd say to me in the past, when I was young, about 14, 15, when we started having these in-depth conversations, and you'd have loved him. And he'd say, "Jim, you're a transmitter. You're not a receiver." I said, "What do you mean, Ron?" He said, "Well, you're not listening. You're thinking of what you're going to say before I finish talking, so you're not listening to everything." Massive thing to say to somebody at such a young age, and I kind of took it on board. And I think it's a skill that if you haven't got it, some people have it naturally, but it's something that I've always wanted to do because it hasn't come naturally to me. But I think I'm a lot better than I was years ago. And I want to be that person for my children. If my sons and daughter are talking to, I want to give them everything. I want to, and the phones, as you know, phones and modern day technology, they really have taken and they've really kind of diluted, and I use the word diluted quite a lot. And I get annoyed with the phone. I get annoyed with the way I'm suckered into a phone quite a bit. But going back to Ron, Ron was one of them that really kind of developed me and would be brutal sometimes with some of the things I'd say. And I'll always remember, there's a saying that I always have, and I'll say it to you, and I'll say Anthony, and I'll mean it. I heard him say it years ago. "You're a gentleman, Anthony. There's not many of us left. The rest are dead." You know, so it's. But he'd come out with all these type of comments, and I'm very, very fond of Ron, and so yeah, and people like Dave McNish as well, who's my football coach and big friend of mine. They've shaped me not only career wise but as a person. So
yeah, and that's great, and I think that it's a good perspective on love. Being straightened out by someone's comments is also a form of love.
Yes,
you know, to for that person cares enough to straighten you out and say, "Look, you're a transmitter."
Yeah,
you know, you're trying to answer before I've finished talking. You know, you're thinking of the answer. You know, and it might seem stern at the time. However, what a fantastic piece of advice. And I often find in my life the hardest hitting advice has often been to the person who said it, a flippant comment. And I always cite a guy called Colin, and it was one of my first engineering jobs out of the army, and he used to work on the saws and cut materials and fetch stuff for us. And he would take a drawing and read the drawing, and he would cut all the materials for us, and he'd organise all the parts and everything else. And he'd say to him, "You know, I really appreciate this, Colin, but you don't have to do this for me. You know, it'd all be labelled up, taped up, everything. Wonderful." And he'd say, "Yeah, but I always think of the next guy." To him, it was a flippant statement. But to me, I walked away from that conversation. You know, here's this guy who's everyday life. He doesn't have to do this. It's not part of his remit. You know, he just gets parts and organises parts and cuts material. You know, but he always thought of the next guy, and it was massive. It was huge for me. You know, that just that one statement, and I can only ever thank him and credit him for him he didn't. And I've reminded him of that conversation. You know, over the years, he just doesn't remember saying it. You know, to him it was a nothing statement. To me, it was huge.
And that's the thing, is that some people don't realise the impact that they have on other people.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's things that happen, people taking their own lives, for example, and they don't realise the impact they have on other people and the value that they bring to life. And
absolutely.
To somebody, I know we've jumped onto that subject quite quickly, but that's just, I would hate to be somebody that says something flippantly that affects, and we all have,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
that upsets somebody, and I'm very mindful that I would never put, and I mean this, I would never put bad, I would never, and even somebody, if somebody doesn't like me, it doesn't mean to say that I shouldn't like them. And that's been something I've carried with me through all my working life. And I had some terrible situations with one individual in my working life. I thought the world of him, but because I kind of decided to change my career in a way, he didn't like me. But I saw that I saw the good in him, even though he decided. But getting back to that comment is that these comments that can mean so much, but they've been passed flippantly to somebody, and. But yeah, I would hate to think also that, as I said before, I would hate to think that something I've flippantly said would affect somebody. And I know that there's been a comment before where I've said and never meant, in terms of a jumper that my lovely kind of mother-in-law, Pat, was wearing, a really dear person, Michelle's mum, one of the nicest people you could ever meet. And she had a jumper on, and it was like a cricket jumper.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, you'll be playing cricket later on. I loved the jumper, but I didn't say I loved the jumper. I said, oh, you'll be playing cricket later. And she decided after that comment never to wear that jumper again. And I was devastated to hear that. And I said to Michelle, I wish I'd have said it in a different manner, because I would never, ever want to. And I think some people should realise as well the impact of certain things that they could say to somebody that would have a dramatic impact on them. So I'm more mindful over the years. Because when you're at school, sometimes there's you look back sometimes at school and you think, I really didn't speak to that person as well as I could have spoke to that person. And I've seen people nowadays, that one lady in particular, lovely lady, who I didn't speak very nicely to as a kid, and we had a great chat. And I always remember saying sorry to her. I said I was really not very pleasant to you, and she said, "Don't be silly. It was at school." No, but I didn't speak very nicely to you at point, and I'm so sorry for that. But she's lovely, but that just, it makes you're part of a journey, and as long as you can learn from these things as you go along,
Yeah, absolutely. So, whilst we're on the theme of embrace, and before we get into DAB, there have to be some absolutely memorable, funny moments from starting up a radio station. You know, whether it's weird callers or funny messages or something. So, can you give the sort of people at home an insight into the weird stuff that can happen around radio? Because, you know, we've all seen it on the sort of the telly about bloopers and whatnot, right? So there's got to be something locally that's happened.
Well, there was one, and it was one of my first shows. I did a penalty shootout phone-in, where if you got the question right, you scored a penalty, this, that, and the other. And I was working in a place called Curver at the time. And I prepped one of them, so I was worried that nobody would phone in. So I'd prepped somebody to phone in. Yeah. And his name was Tommy. And he caught me out. And he said, he did the question, he did the answers. He did quite well, actually. And at the end of that, he said, thanks very much, Tommy. Thanks for your call. And he said, Jim, I just got a question. I said, all right. He said, is there any overtime on Monday? And I was like, I went, thanks very much for that, Tommy. Yeah, cheers, thank you. So then, quite guarded when I do, I generally don't do live phone-ins nowadays, but it was funny, it happened at an early time. I mean, just, there's probably so many that, I always remember this presenter who mentioned, well, they remain nameless, and they were all big about giving out, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, and you can't say this, and you can't say that, and you should be, and they turned up for their show once, and they were having troubles technically, and I was thinking, and they asked for my help, and my co-presenter was with me, lovely guy, one of my dear friends called Willie Doherty, and when he was setting up, and there's a mic that was dropped down, he was standing up to the mic like this, and he was trying to read out the local news, and he was moaning in the background when the mic was off, so he put the mic up, to the slider up to talk, and the mic fell and hit him on the head. And I tried to keep a straight face because he was obviously very stressed at the time. So we waited, got the mic fixed, and we walked out the studio, and we just bundled into laughter. Yeah. And it was a lovely moment because he's been a right pain, to be fair. But that was one of. But there's probably so many that you've nicely caught me offside there. That if I could really think of them, I suppose we could have a podcast just solely on those things where I could research various people's kind of mishaps, and that there would be many of them. That's for sure. I mean, playing Star Trek in at 8 o'clock in the morning is probably one that I won't repeat. But there'll be various things, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So, you know, and we love Embrace here. You know, that's our radio station of choice, and it's such a, you know, it's such a wonderful vibe that you and Paul give off about the place. So we love that. And now we've got to move on to the infamous DAB, right? So let's talk about, probably for the benefit of the viewers, what is DAB first of all, and then how have you guys got into that, and where's it going in the future?
So it's digital broadcasting. So you, in different to your FM frequency, it's more clear and it's crisp. And I think it was the next progression from FM, and people would say that FM would close down or would start to kind of reduce in number, and that is happening. It's like AM, medium wave. You've got various big broadcasters or like Bauer, for instance, who are starting to turn off their transmitters for that. So it's a natural progression. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to broadcast on DAB. So we researched broadcasting on the cost with Arqiva, and I had to be careful about this. So we, simply put, we could never afford Arqiva's rates. It's such a small company. So Ofcom brought out an initiative some years ago now called SSDAB, which is small scale DAB. So it would have the same impact as, or the same kind of message or route as FM broadcasting for regions. So Corby Radio, for example, broadcasts in a region, so it's FM in Corby.
Yeah.
So that's what Ofcom were going to allow. So you could do DAB in Corby.
Yeah.
Well, what they've done, that you put transmitters up, they advertised for a license for Kettering in Corby. So our company that we created would apply for that license.
Yeah.
And fortunately, we've been lucky. My company, Paul's company, has been very lucky in being successfully awarded that license. But there's a cost to it. There's thousands and thousands of pounds to set up these transmitters. And we were lucky enough to win the one for Rutland and Stamford to begin with. So what that means is it's a multiplex. It's different to, so talking about Embrace would broadcast on these multiplexes. So if you think about a flat, and you would have 12 rooms in that flat, and you would, as the multiplex owner, rent space out or rent rooms out, broadcasting space, to other radio stations. So in Rutland and Stamford, our company not only has Embrace on there, but we also have Massive Hits. We also have Rutland and Stamford Sound, which is a local community station for that area. And we've had other interest as well. So that was our first project. And we are on in Northampton as well. We co-own one in Northampton, DAB Multiplex. But we were very fortunate as well to win the license for Kettering and Corby. So hopefully that's going to come on soon as well. We've applied for Market Harborough. We have confidence of getting that as well. But we can't get by without the support of businesses. And we've been very fortunate, and this isn't a love-in by any stretch, but we've been very fortunate for the likes of you that invest in projects around the town and for radio. And other sponsors that have really helped us. And I can't express the gratitude not only to you, but to those people as well.
Yeah.
Because without them, we wouldn't be anywhere. Without listeners, we wouldn't be anywhere. And sometimes, you know, you've got to understand that it's like chicken and an egg. I always remember talking to another dear friend of mine, Phil Alsop, is that how do you get your listeners? So you get that out there. It's like chicken and egg, but you've got to build that brand, and you've got to advertise it correctly, but you've got to have the funds to be able to advertise correctly. You don't get those funds until you get people like your good self that come in. We like what you're doing. We'd like to sponsor one of your radio shows or do, you know, whatever. And that's what it is. So there's thousands, without going into the business plan and to bore anybody with that, is that doing these type of things costs a lot of money. And the only way you can get that money through radio is through advertising and sponsorship.
I suppose the reach is important, which is where the DAB comes in, having these multiplexes.
Yes.
You know, is is important. So, I think it's a great business model. I think it's very, again, without going into it, it seems very future proof. The idea of having the reach because of the DAB, but because DAB is looking more and more like the replacement for FM. I suppose it lends itself to a logical question. Would you consider, and you don't have to answer this, would you consider ever putting them in tandem to get a greater reach? So, for example, moving backwards to FM, whilst maintaining the DAB, and then picking up maybe more viewership or something like that?
Definitely. It's a great question.
You don't have to answer. You might not know the answer. I just,
That's a great question. Let me be clear on FM, is that just because I think technology would advance that, I'm a massive fan of FM. And Corby Radio, who's in Corby locally, and has done a tremendous service to the community for over 30 years through restricted licenses and on FM since 2009. And they rightly deserve to continue that on on DAB, and I hope they do, is the answer to that. But I would, it's like Radio Gaga, isn't it? Radio should never die out. It'd probably be the last forms of communication that will be with us, and forever what happens with technology advancement. But FM, I still support it. I'm still a big fan of it, and long may it continue as well. But we have to also understand that we have to embrace.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Other technological advances. A lot of people are listening to radio through smart speakers, through the internet, through their phones, and but there's always a medium. And also, just to get back to having radio stations, because you think we own Embrace, we're going to sit on these multiplexes anyway. But our company's going to invite other radio stations onto there, which would, by natural recourse, be competitors to our brand. But the way I've always looked at it, Anthony, is that I'm always up for healthy competition. You can't have all the sponsors. You can't have all the advertisers.
You can't have all the listeners.
You can't, exactly. Yeah. And you kind of position your product in a way that is, attractive to a certain audience. And it's like everything nowadays. You'd have classical FM. I know people that listen to classical FM in the afternoon, listen to us in the morning, and whatever else will listen to Corby Radio in the evening because they like a show on there. And long may that continue. So I've always been that if a radio station is in direct competition with us, great. Yeah, they deserve to be, and there's always a way to do business honestly. And I would never step on anybody's toes. So if I knew that somebody was after a particular sponsor, and know somebody, Jim, you'll never be a businessman, but if I knew they were after that, I would direct my attention elsewhere. Yeah. That's the way I've always been. And that doesn't mean to say that I can't be successful in business with that approach, because I think you can be. There's something for everybody, and I think that it's nice that you've asked about the DAB. It's nice that, and I've prayed to God that our brand, I've imagined it, I've believed it, and I've now started to receive it because I just want it to be a good thing for people. And there's many platforms on DAB for community groups, charities, religions, whatever that is, to jump on these platforms so they can spread the word of whatever they do. Yeah. And I'm very proud of that.
Well, I'm pro free speech. I'm a free speech absolutist. So I think that there's always a case for everybody should be heard, unfiltered. Offence is only taken, it's never given. I don't believe in a lot of the... I mean, we grew up as kids, sticks and stones, right? So I think everybody should have that opportunity. And it's great that from a commercial radio perspective that you're happy to entertain, the competitors, as it were.
I always believe, and I've said it just now, is that everybody deserves a chance. Everybody. And there's another little Jim Byrne out there. I mean, I'm talking as if I've arrived and I'm a megalomaniac success, or whatever you want to. I'm not. I feel that I'm a success, no matter how low that is. I'm a success because I've got a family that I love, that loves me, And that's my biggest success. So
Yeah.
it's success in radio terms and media or whatever. The biggest success that I could have is that there was one other Jim Byrne that gets the chance, like Des Barber gave to me, that I could give to them, then fantastic. That would mean the world to me.
I think the kids call it paying it forward, and I'm
Yeah.
a big fan of that myself.
Yeah.
I think it's great to provide whatever people do with that opportunity is up to them, but to give them that leg up, that start,
Yeah.
is, you know, it's good for the soul, right? You know, to give people that opportunity.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's wonderful and commendable. You know.
Well, you know, it's important that that they do get that chance, and I think with small scale DAB, it's given everybody a chance, and it is. Would you believe it is affordable? So a lot of people have looked at, it costs $1,000 to do the thing, but one sponsor, one person that believes in that person and their mission and their vision, would make the world the difference. It's not as expensive as you might think.
Yeah.
And it's achievable. So don't anybody be put off by the fact that it's going to cost this, it's going to cost that. Somebody out there wants to support you.
Yeah, and that's great. Mm-hmm. You know, we do something like that around engineering. We're always mindful about there's not necessarily a route to market for younger people, or they don't understand what that looks like. So we really try and encourage people. You know, we've had kids from Warwick College that haven't had a work placement. We'll get them in. You know, come work here for a week. We've had people who've maybe gone round the houses the wrong way with engineering. We had a young man who's just finished a degree in engineering, but didn't do an apprenticeship, but wants to do practical engineering, actually working on machines, but he couldn't tell you one end of a spanner from the other. So you know, it's about helping him about, you know, what's the route to market there. You know, we've got an apprentice starting in September. So you know, and it is very much about paying that forward. And the message to them is, we don't need anything in return. One day you're going to meet somebody who needs that leg up, and you're going to be placed to help them. So please make sure that you remember this conversation for that moment in your life. And I think this is where, you know, as companies and as people, where we align, and why it's so easy for us to work together on this sort of thing.
Well, it's a great thing you said there, and it's all about, you don't do it for it, but whatever you put out there that's good, you'll get it back.
Yeah.
You know, try not to be holistic in all this and kind of get all cosmic, but it's true. And the amount of things that perhaps you wouldn't notice that you've put out come back in different ways. Yeah. And if you have that mantra in life, whether you believe in God or whatever, if you put good out into the world, you'll get it back.
Yeah.
I've no doubts about that whatsoever. And my dear friend Paul Moore is one of them that, you know, if you met Paul for the first time, like I did, I was thinking, who is this guy? You know, I wouldn't say that I particularly was fond of him when I first met him. I liked him, but I was just thinking, but when you get to know him, and he talks, he walks the walk more than he'll talk the talk. And what he's put out there to people, and some of the people he's helped in years gone by, some of them, unfortunately, that have forgotten about that.
Yeah.
And the things he's helped people to give them a leg up is phenomenal. And I just want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to him, because I don't give him as much kind of those plaudits, and he'll probably say, "Oh, stop it," because he doesn't like that type of thing. But he's been great for me. Paul Moore has been fantastic for me, and I'm very grateful for that.
No, that's wonderful. Well, that leads me nicely into the next question, because you said don't get too cosmic. So I won't get too cosmic, but I will get a bit biblical. So
I'm fine with that.
how does your faith influence what you do through Embrace? Because I think it's important to mention that Paul isn't a man of faith.
No, he's not.
So, which, you know, is interesting and led to some fun conversations for you both all the time. But how does your faith lead you and influence the things you do through Embrace?
Well, I was only talking to him recently, and he talks about it more than I do. Let me be clear about that. So I'm thinking there's something there. Everything is the first short answer to that. And I pray in the morning, I pray at night. I pray, as I have done since a little kid, for God to protect my family, my friends, some of the friends and people that don't like me, I pray for them. I just give them the guidance, this, that, and the other, and that's just who I always have been, and will always be. Even though through times when we've all come to these points in life, even those that have got the strongest of faiths, go through periods that they doubt, but the faith brings them through. And talking to Paul, which is brilliant, and I'd say to anybody that has faith, is to not turn away from people that don't have faith, because you'll have some of the best conversations you'll ever have with these people, and they're generally, I feel they're looking for answers. They want to make sense of stuff, and by you giving your views that are not dogmatic but open to how they feel as much as you'd like them is wonderful. And I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but I think it's important to say where we are in the world right now. And we're in a position, particularly those in the media, that are frightened to say things at the fear of being cancelled, particularly over the last 5-6 years, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And I think we as people and our faith, Anthony, have to be more tolerant of their certain people's views than they have to be of ours.
Yeah.
And that really frustrates me. If there's anything if I want to change anything, it would be that. Because you could get asked a question and give your honest answer, and you could be cancelled.
Or jailed.
Yeah. And I really would like that to change. And I remember an interview with a celebrity in the last year or so that are petrified of that by being asked a question. And I'll use J.K. Rowling as an example. And I don't want to kind of poke the beast or
poke away, mate. I don't
the
mind.
hornet's nest or whatever you might be. But I respect everybody's opinion. Yeah, I might not agree with it, but I respect, because you are entitled to have your opinion.
Yeah.
Whatever how misguided that other people might think, but because it's their opinion. But J.K. Rowling quoted a fact.
Yeah.
About something. We won't go into the detail of it. And the vitriol and things that have been said about her just because she said this, quoted a fact, I found quite horrific. If you disagree with something that person has said, then do it in a way that doesn't... even now I feel that I have to be careful about what I say, but I'll say it from the heart, is that just respect other people's views, even if you don't agree with them yourself.
Yeah.
Because if I have to respect your view, might not agree with it, then that's what I ask in return.
Yeah, reciprocation.
Reciprocation. Don't try and cancel me. And even at a low level of radio, I'm not at Chris Evans level or whatever else like that, but I'm at a level that I'm very proud of. But I've got to walk a minefield as well with that. I can't go on social media and post some of the true feelings I have about certain things, but they're private to me. I could discuss them with you, because I trust you. I trust James. I trust Paul. I trust my wife, and I've got I've got a lot of friends, but I've got a very small, deep friendships with with people like Eamon and Joe and whoever. I've got really good friends. And they'll know my true feelings about certain things that I wouldn't be able to discuss from a media perspective, because it's private to me. And I always remember Elvis Presley was asked, "What do you think of such and such and such and such?" And he said, "Look, I'm an entertainer. Do you disagree with that?" I said, "I'm an entertainer, and I want to entertain the public." And his public persona is very different from his private one, and they need to be separated from that perspective as well. But that's the way I feel about it.
And I think there's an air of professionalism in that, isn't there? What your personal sentiment isn't necessarily the position of embrace, because it's more than just you. So having that sort of separation is important. I don't know much about radio, but I'm not a fan of Ofcom, for example. And it's a personal opinion, I don't think it should exist. I think the right thing to do is have less regulation and less, state intervention with these things. And the best thing that could happen for broadcasting from a local or a national level is the absolute eradication of Ofcom. They provide no value. can remember being younger and Radio Caroline's for me is and I'm going to name and shame Radio Caroline here, right? They were on the inception of Radio Caroline, were at the time arguably the single greatest advocates for free speech. Pirate radio from a ship in effectively international waters, to the point where they had Dutch mercenaries on board there smashing up the equipment. And let's make no bones about it, on behalf of the British government, right? Because they couldn't directly deal with that threat. They were so powerful that they, in their, maybe they didn't understand the power that they had. All the young, they nearly wrecked the BBC, because they were broadcasting music from the States that everybody wanted, but the BBC wouldn't allow. Mm-hmm. And now they've almost become the thing that they were set up. They became the thing that they hated. So they are a fully licensed radio station on AM, which nobody's listening to, save possibly people who remember Radio Caroline with a fond, and I could be way off base here, but this is my personal perception of it. They've now become
the gamekeepers.
Yeah, they're the gamekeepers, right? And it makes, and I don't hate those guys. I actually have Radio Caroline on in the van sometimes as a reminder to never become the thing that you hate. And it makes me sad. This institution that was driven by, he was an Irish fella actually, who started this, and he pulled every stop, right? The guy, like a wizard with the law, knew how to work around it. And now Radio Caroline is all the poorer for what they are now, not what they were.
The only thing I can relate to that is that I've got to bring my nerd mode in. Is Star Wars.
Yeah.
Star Wars was brilliant in terms of the original trilogy was fantastic. They brought out the prequels. I never thought, the prequels were okay, but the prequels were made brilliant again, or brilliant because the sequels should never have been made in terms. And I always remember my first opinion, or my first feeling when it was announced that George Lucas has sold Lucasfilms to Disney.
Yeah.
And they're going to make 3 new films, and they're going to follow on from the Return of the Jedi. Was how can you match or better the Emperor Palpatine, Darth Vader? You just couldn't.
Yeah.
But they decided that it's a cash cow. We're going to make as much money as we can, and it suffered. And I hate to say it, I thought The Force Awakens was really good, and but then The Last Jedi was just, I just still can't comprehend what they were trying to do with that. And even more so with The Rise of Skywalker, I just think, wow. And just using that as an example, it was disappointing along the same lines that you said. I'm not going to mention Ofcom.
You don't have
I won't get sacked into that or dragged into that, but I respect what you say for sure. But that's the only thing I can kind of correlate with that, Anthony, in terms of the.
Well, Disney consistently lose money hand over fist now with their movies, and the backlash online, whether it's deserved or not, they're in this rut where whatever they seem to put out has huge backlash at the box offices.
Doctor Who is the same at the minute. I'm probably the biggest fan of Doctor Who, and I'm all for inclusivity. Absolutely, I always find whatever it is, where there's love, there's God, and a lot of the storylines from Doctor Who, I feel have been there's an agenda that's getting pushed that I don't like, and I think changing Doctor Who from a woman, and this is not a sexist view at all, and it came from my wife, it was the wrong decision, because it was giving the man the platform that to solve really bad things or terrible things. He used his brain power, he used his innovative skills without going down a line where he had to throw his fists at anybody or whatever else. And somebody said, and it was a great article as well, that why are we taking that away from a man? That we're diluting, I use that word again, what a man can do, and this, that, and the other, and to turn it just. I felt it was a I think it was the first thing that Chris Chibnall wanted to do. For a great actress, let me be clear, Jodie Whittaker, fantastic, and I thought she was really good as Doctor Who, but Chris Chibnall didn't really serve her right with some of the scripts and that he gave. And I just felt that from him then, he was using Doctor Who as a platform to appease other people. And that really kind of frustrated me and a lot of Doctor Who fans, because it's and Doctor Who, you could say, well, Doctor Who's always been a vehicle for doing that, but it went too far left in terms of my opinion, and it was disappointing, and the scripts have suffered since.
I mean, I haven't watched a Doctor Who for a very long time. As you would know, I don't have a television, and haven't had for many years, and it's simply because of institutions like the BBC. And I'm not going, I've already bashed Ofcom. I'm not going to go down a route of, now bashing the BBC. But I mean, the only thing I would say about that is the BBC wouldn't exist in its current form if it was, if the decision was mine. I would. The BBC needs to go. In its current format, it's awful. And I think, TV licensing, payments reflect this. They're losing a lot of TV licenses, and you could argue it's a legacy media. People are moving to they're moving towards the internet for their viewing and stuff like that. These sort of streaming services, but they've definitely lost their way, and in the spirit of trying to rekindle something, have picked a side in a culture war that they didn't necessarily have to get involved in. They could have took the moral high ground and said, look, very much like Elvis Presley, we are just here to entertain. And I may be wrong, but I'm pretty confident that Doctor Who is the single longest running TV show in the world.
61, 62 years now.
So it legitimately is a British institution within a British institution, and it's obviously been broadcast all over the world. And what the BBC have done, from my perspective, and I certainly wouldn't put words in anyone else's mouth, is they've taken this institution, they've corrupted it for the benefit of picking a side in a culture war that let's be honest, the BBC don't understand well enough to involve themselves in. Because if you look at people on the right, they say that the BBC is too left. And if you look at people on the left, they say the BBC is too right. And unfortunately, they haven't struck the middle ground. And then you look at recent events where they've been, Question Time's a perfect example of this, where they've been caught out deliberately populating the audience with their own agenda. Look at them being the wrong side of employment law because they're trying to meet quotas of various things. They are fundamentally, as far as I'm concerned, morally bankrupt. And it's unfortunate that such great institutions suffer because of their behaviour. And that's certainly not, I know that's my take just for the world, and it's a tragedy. And it makes me sad, that you can have this beloved thing like Doctor Who where, we've all grown up as children with Doctor Who, right? And have fond memories of, K9, for example, or whatever from, your favourite characters or your favourite villains, and it's been ravaged by this attempt to fundamentally alter the Doctor's, being.
Well, I think, Anthony, that we've become a tick box society.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
We've as a society, when people like Sam Smith come out and say that we've got to refer to him as they, and I've met an individual recently, lovely individual, and I didn't know how to refer to that individual, and that's the minefield that you're doing. Is it?
Yeah.
He, she, they. There's, and I don't think it's like nobody creates a book to say you should now refer. It's like before we were referred to. It was the colour of skin, for example. Years and years ago, it was coloured.
Yeah.
Now it's black, and you think, right, okay, there was never a book to say that you should say that.
Yeah.
And I always remember Alan Hansen, who was on the BBC, brilliant, one of the best pundits you could ever hope to have in front of you on the TV. And I think one night he referred to somebody that was black as coloured, and he was pretty much vilified, and I believe that's one of the reasons he chose to step down. And that really frustrates me, is that there's all these virtue signalers that want to be and are waiting to be offended so they can get on the moral high ground to say, you can't say this, you can't say that, and whatever else. I just feel that as long as you're a good person, you mean well, you just, unfortunately, even by doing that, some people still to this day are getting cancelled. Let's not go into the details of it for sure, but Gary Lineker is another example. You look at who the BBC have allegedly, I say this, perpetrated to protect over the years, and Gary Lineker does something, and immediately he's finished as a on BBC. One of the best football presenters you could ever hope to have. Take him to one side. Don't say that. You can't do this. These are the rules. Blah blah blah. Which I think he suffered in the last couple of years anyway. But what I'm saying is that, in summary, we have to be very careful about what we say, because those that have this agenda, they want to be heard. They don't want you to be heard.
But it's interesting. So this is one of the things we might disagree on. I fundamentally don't like Gary Lineker. I've got a very poor opinion of the man, because I think he's a good example of someone who said, "Do as I say, not as I do," prior to this incident. But weirdly, don't support him being cancelled. So I've disagreed with, and do disagree with a lot of things that Gary Lineker says socially, and not about his sports commentary. There's no argument that he's had an incredibly successful career on the pitch and off, but
Well, we are in agreement. Sorry, Anthony, to cut across you, because in terms of his opinion, he's entitled to his opinion.
Yeah,
I don't say I agree with what he's done, but I agree. I think we're agreed that he's a first class presenter. First class presenter, and because of what he's done on social media or whatever else like that, he's now had to step down. And we won't go into the details.
Of course.
Of it, well, that's quite a heavy subject.
We'll be on to the next current thing. In a couple of weeks, someone else would have stepped into that minefield. But like I say, I think if he'd have just stuck at the football, and it comes back to this: why did we all watch television in the early days anyway? It was to be entertained. It's the same as radio. Why do you listen to it? It's to be entertained. You like the presenters, you like the music. You feel like they're in the room with you. A great radio station does that for you. You're there with them, and this culture war has really started to ruin things for people.
I just think Anthony's gone too far.
Yeah, but I see the pendulum swinging back the other way now.
I agree.
I feel that there's maybe we're at the start. I mean, all we need to do is hit the middle ground, right? I don't care about left. I don't care about right. Let's just be reasonable, pragmatic, decent human beings somewhere down there. And we can just agree to disagree and go back to, I
think you've summed it all up better than I could ever do that. So yeah, I just fear that it's gone too far the other way.
Yeah, and I think that there is a strong argument to say that because of things like the Communication Act, the police have been weaponised against, celebrities and people on social media platforms, and it would appear from the outside, and I'm not saying it's correct, but from what I can see, that they pick and choose who gets arrested when and how much, what the penalties are for those people, and I think that, the BBC has certainly protected individuals. They can't get away from their history and their legacy, so but it's about just being open and truthful, right? I think we just need to have that conversation and say what is reasonable, because like you quite rightly pointed out, there isn't a handbook or a manual or a printed thing so that you know how to conduct yourselves in these circumstances. The first time is there's a complaint or the police are showing up, and it can come from a place of love, and then you find yourself in hot water.
Well, I'd just perhaps finish up on that line of talk is that one of the biggest things that disappointed me in how far we've gone the other way is that, and I think it was in the UK, I'm sure it was in the UK, that somebody outside, I believe it was an abortion clinic. It was a Christian.
The lady. Yes, I
It
know
was
who
a
you're talking
Christian
about. Yeah.
individual decided silently
In their head. Yeah.
to pray.
Yep.
And that individual, I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, was arrested
That's correct. On more than one occasion.
on more than one occasion for silently praying.
Yep.
Wow. Wow, are we
We're there now, policing
just,
thoughts.
come on, come and take not affecting anybody. I don't know whether they were blocking anything, but anyway, everyone's got the right to silent protest.
Yeah.
Surely they have. And that really worries me, is that if that's how far we've gone, I worry. But I do think the positive side of looking at it is, I think the pendulum has started. I think a lot of people are starting to get a little bit more common sense now. I hope, anyway. But I do see an undertone of it changing.
I think the old adage, the us and them, that divide is bigger now than it's ever been, and I think that it's problematic for, and I'm going to call them the Westminster elite. It's problematic because they live in this bubble over here, and they are not following their own rules. And most people, I think we could maybe agree, there's a sense of what we call British fairness, right? Nobody minds if the rules are the same for everybody, whether you like the rule or not, then we're okay with it. But when it appears that it's do as I say, not as I do, or this particular group is subject to this particular rule, but this group isn't subject to the same enforcement of that rule, then it creates dissent. And there's a lot of that, certainly being around a lot of working class people in the factories, there's a huge amount of dissent at the moment because of this perception of misalignment between government bodies, whether it be through media, whether it be through the law, whatever it is. There's this perception that people are being silenced for the benefit of the few. And
I agree. I think it's about tolerance, Anthony.
Yeah.
Tolerance. And I'm always, as I say, I remind you that I'm up for inclusivity. If you believe a particular thing, like I do, then I respect your opinion, whilst I might not agree with it or whatever. So I respect that you. And I'll give you an example before we close. Is that, and it's a very simple one, and I'm ashamed to say it, although I've spoke to my son about it. My young son Harry, big fan of wrestling, massive. I know we talked off mic about your experiences, which you'll have to broadcast at some point. Trust me, it's very good. Is that he loves wrestling. I can't stand wrestling, right? Oh, and I used to watch it with him, and I used to always say, look, he missed him, but he's hurt. How does he keep missing him? And that type of nonsense. So I was sitting down, the family were all around. We're in Norwich with our family, and it was a very important episode of Doctor Who. It was when Jodie Whittaker turned regenerated back into David Tennant.
Right.
And me and Miles, my other son, who loves Doctor Who as well, we got very kind of fanboyish. Yay! And then Harry got his moment and started having a dig at me. And it taught me a lesson. He said, and I turned around to him and I thought, no, you're absolutely right. And since then, I've wanted to know more about wrestling. How dare I?
Yeah.
How dare I, as a person, ridicule anything that anybody, and just, it doesn't matter how small it is or whatever. And it taught me a lesson about myself. How dare I? And since I've made the effort to find out a little bit more about wrestling, dare I say, I found it a little bit more interesting. I'm not there. I'm not kind of.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever will be. But that's just an example of what we're talking about. Is the tolerance, and don't dismiss anything. You want us to understand you. You've got to understand us as well.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it's the tolerance level.
Yeah, fairness. It's got to be balanced, right? So what's in the future for Embrace?
DAB.
Yeah.
We're looking for. We're always looking for sponsors. Our model is based on sponsorship as opposed to cluttering our output with adverts. We're not saying we won't do adverts, but we just want to be. We could make a lot more money doing that, but we want to get back to the music and the content quicker. That's our model has always been that way. But we're always looking for sponsors that believe in us. But it's not only taking money off sponsors and to keep us alive. It's about what we can give back to the sponsors as well. We want to work long term with those. And some sponsors that have come on board before don't see that they'll get anything of it, but they just take heart in the fact that they're supporting something that that can do a lot for the community.
Yeah.
And that means just as much. So we can work on that. But yeah, I think we've got a bright future. And I think that everyone's got a bright future, no matter who they are in terms of radio. There's a platform for everybody. And we want to work with them. I know they're going to compete with us, but we want to work with them because we can get the best out of each other.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. And what about if there's a young person watching this or someone who's just interested in getting to radio? If you were to give a short summary on your advice from someone who's heard this and thought, you know what, that sounds fantastic, it's for me, how would you, like, short bullet points advice for them to get into radio?
Well, firstly, I'd want to help them. So get in touch. So if you email jim.byrne@embraceradio.co.uk, if that's okay. I'm going to look at you directly, because if you are watching this, you've got every right to follow a career, whether it's in front of a mic, behind the mic, whatever that may be. We can help you with that. So please get in touch. jim.byrne@embraceradio.co.uk. Byrne is spelt Byrne. We want to help in whatever way we can, and we can give you that platform.
And most importantly, where can they find Embrace Radio?
Where can they find Embrace Radio? So you can find us on DAB, currently in Rutland and Stamford, if you live around those areas, in Northampton. You'll soon hear us in Kettering and Corby, hopefully in Market Harborough, but you can definitely find us wherever you are, online, www.embraceradio.co.uk, on your smart speakers, just say, or Alexa, launch Embrace. So, yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
I've really, really enjoyed it. So I hope the listeners, watchers have enjoyed it as well. Have you enjoyed it?
I've loved it. I've loved it. You know,
there's so much we can talk about, Anthony.
Yeah, of course. And I think that maybe we'll give it a bit of time, but I think maybe we could do a revisit, and maybe we could talk Paul into coming too.
Because you do well to get Paul. Yeah, I think it'd be a great idea, though. He's got so much to share.
Yeah,
so much knowledge.
And that's the. I mean, you know, you've spoke about him at length, so you know, maybe for him to put his 2 pence in would be fantastic.
Oh, he's a great guy. So it's so much full of knowledge, but it's one of them that says it as it is.
Yeah.
You know, and you've got to be prepared that he won't sugarcoat anything. He says it as it is, and I like to be around people like that.
Yeah.
I really do. You know where you are, you know, and that's where some people might misperceive him as a person.
Well, I'm sure he doesn't mind if he continues down that. You know,
he'd probably be happy at that, to be fair. But no, he's a great guy.
No, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, you know, thanks everybody for watching, and
thank you.
look for Jim in the future.